It was an ordinary Thursday when I found it, hidden away in the dusty corner of an old bookstore. The shop was one of those forgotten places where the air felt thick with stories waiting to be told. I was on the hunt for a rare first edition of Poe, but what caught my eye was something far more sinister. A leather-bound journal, stained dark with age, and something else I couldn't quite place. The pages were yellowed, frayed at the edges, but it was the faint smell of iron that made my stomach churn. I hesitated before picking it up, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The cover was engraved with a single unsettling word, Revelations. I should have left it there, but curiosity, that old devil, got the better of me. Back at my apartment, I settled into my worn armchair, the journal resting on my lap like some ancient relic. The city hummed softly outside my window, a world away from the one I was about to step into. The first entry was dated March 3rd, 1998. The handwriting was meticulous, every letter perfectly formed, almost too perfect. The journal described a brutal murder, a case I vaguely remembered hearing about during my early days on the force. A young woman found mutilated in her apartment, her blood used to paint cryptic symbols on the walls. I flipped through the pages, each one recounting a different murder, each more gruesome than the last. The details were unsettlingly precise, things that only the killer could know. But what truly made my blood run cold was the final sentence of each entry. This one is just the beginning. I couldn't help but notice the dates. Each entry was recorded before the murder happened. My mind raced, a storm of thoughts crashing together. Had someone predicted these killings? Or was this journal the work of a deranged murderer, documenting their crimes in advance? The idea was absurd, but the evidence was right in front of me. I barely slept that night, my dreams haunted by images of the victims, their lifeless eyes staring at me, pleading for justice. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The journal had to be taken to the precinct. But as I reached for my phone, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. A new entry had appeared on the final page, one that hadn't been there the night before. The date was today, and the name of the next victim was someone I knew all too well. My hands trembled as I read the name again, trying to make sense of it. How could this be possible? The ink was fresh, the words still wet, smudging slightly under my fingertips. But the handwriting was the same meticulous, almost inhuman script that had filled the previous pages. The name on the page was Claire Saunders, my sister. I bolted from my chair, the journal clutched tightly in my hand. Claire lived only a few blocks away, and the thought of her in danger filled me with a dread I hadn't felt in years. I had to warn her, had to protect her. But as I grabbed my coat, the city outside seemed to twist, the familiar streets turning into a maze of shadows and fear. I felt it then. A presence, something watching me from the corners of my apartment, from the very pages of the journal itself. I didn't dare look back as I slammed the door behind me, my only thought to reach Claire before it was too late. But deep down, I knew that whatever had written those words was already one step ahead of me, and it was just getting started. I sprinted through the narrow, rain-soaked streets, my heart pounding louder with every step. The journal felt like a lead weight in my pocket, each of its sinister words echoing in my mind. The night seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper, as if the city itself was conspiring to slow me down. Every corner I turned felt wrong, unfamiliar, as if the very streets were shifting to keep me from Claire. When I finally reached her building, I slammed my fist against the buzzer, breathless and frantic. "Claire, open up, it's me," I yelled into the intercom, my voice cracking with fear. There was no answer. I slammed the buzzer again, harder this time. Still nothing. The silence on the other end was suffocating, every second that passed a needle in my skin. I wasn't about to wait for an invitation. I kicked the front door with everything I had, the old wood giving way with a sickening crack. I stormed up the stairs, two at a time, the journal's final entry looping in my head like a broken record. This one is just the beginning. When I reached Claire's door, it was ajar, creaking slowly in the breeze from an open window inside. My gut twisted, the air thick with a metallic scent that I recognized all too well. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was eerily quiet, too quiet. Claire? My voice was a whisper, barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. I moved cautiously through the small living room, my eyes scanning every corner for movement, for anything that could tell me where she was. The place was immaculate, just as she always kept it. Except for one thing. A single drop of blood on the hardwood floor, glistening under the dim light. I followed it, my stomach lurching with every step. The droplets led me down the hallway, past photos of us as kids, past her bookshelf and towards her bedroom. The door was half open, and I could see the edge of her bed from where I stood. I pushed the door wider, and there she was, lying on her bed, motionless. Claire. I rushed to her side, dreading what I might find. But as I reached her, she stirred, her eyes fluttering open, groggy and confused. Dan? Her voice was weak, barely more than a croak. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. She wasn't hurt, at least, not visibly. But the sight that met my eyes was something out of a nightmare. On the wall above her bed, scrawled in thick, dark red letters, was a message: "She's next." I swallowed hard, trying to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. "Claire, did you see anyone? Did someone come in here?" She shook her head slowly, her brow furrowing in confusion. "No, I don't. I just woke up." "What's happening?" I glanced at the wall again, at the message that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The blood was fresh, still wet, dripping down the pale paint like tears. I had no idea how it had appeared or how Claire had slept through whatever horror had unfolded here. But one thing was certain: whoever or whatever was behind this was playing a twisted game, and it wasn't done yet. "We need to get out of here," I said, helping her to her feet. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of a puzzle that made no sense. The journal, the entries that predicted murders, the name of my sister scrawled on that final page, and now this. As we left the apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The darkness seemed to press in on us, every shadow hiding unseen eyes. I kept my hand on the small of Claire's back, guiding her down the stairs and out into the night. But the further we got from the building, the more I felt the weight of that journal in my pocket, pulling me back, whispering in a voice I couldn't ignore. When we reached my car, I turned to Claire, trying to mask the fear in my eyes. "We're going to the precinct," I said. "You'll be safe there." But as I opened the car door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I fumbled to pull it out, my heart sinking as I saw the message on the screen. It was a photo of Claire, lying in her bed. The bloody message on the wall behind her. The timestamp was from 5 minutes ago. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications. Someone had been in the apartment with us, watching, waiting, and they had left us a message that I couldn't ignore. The journal was no longer just a record of past murders. It was a blueprint for what was still to come, and whoever was writing it knew every move I was about to make. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my mind reeling from the photo on my phone. Someone had been in that apartment with us, a phantom presence that neither of us had sensed. The thought made my skin crawl, but I had to keep it together for Claire. She sat beside me, staring out the window, lost in her thoughts. I could see the fear in her eyes, the confusion, and it broke my heart. Whatever twisted game was being played, she was caught in the middle of it because of me. I promised myself that I would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant confronting whatever darkness had its claws in us. We drove in silence, the rain tapping against the windshield in a steady rhythm. The city lights blurred together as we sped through the streets, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. The journal, the messages, the murder sit, all pointed to something far beyond the realm of the normal. And yet, I couldn't help but feel that there was something more, something I was missing. As we neared the precinct, I felt a strange sense of dread. It was supposed to be a safe place, a haven where I could get help, where Claire would be protected. But the journal had been one step ahead of me every time. What if it knew I was coming here? What if this was exactly what it wanted? I parked the car in front of the station, the neon sign casting an eerie glow on the wet pavement. I turned to Claire, forcing a reassuring smile. "Stay close to me, okay?" She nodded, her hand gripping mine as we stepped out into the rain. The precinct was quiet, a few officers milling about, the night shift in full swing. I led Claire inside, the warmth of the building a stark contrast to the cold outside. The desk sergeant, a grizzled veteran named O'Hara, looked up as we approached. Dan, what's going on? O'Hara, I need a room somewhere secure, I said, keeping my voice steady. And I need you to get someone to check on Claire's apartment. There's been an incident. He raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. Sure thing, detective. Follow me. He led us down a dimly lit hallway to a small interrogation room. The walls were bare, the only furnishings a table and a few chairs. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. O'Hara handed me the key, his expression grim. I'll send a couple of guys to the apartment. You stay here with her. Thanks, I said, closing the door behind him. Claire sank into one of the chairs, her hands trembling slightly. I took the seat across from her, the journal heavy in my pocket. Dan, what's happening? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why is this happening to us? I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. The truth was, I didn't know the answers myself. But I couldn't keep her in the dark, not when her life was on the line. There's something in this journal, I began, pulling it out and placing it on the table between us. It's not normal. It predicts things, bad things. And somehow it knew about you, about tonight. She stared at the journal, her eyes wide. Predicts? You mean like it can see the future? Something like that, I said, running a hand through my hair. I don't know how, but every time it writes something, it happens. And now it's written about you. Her face paled, and she glanced at the journal as if it might spring to life. What does it say? It said. I hesitated, not wanting to scare her more than she already was. It said you were next. But I'm not going to let that happen, Claire. I swear to you. Before she could respond, the lights in the room flickered, plunging us into darkness for a brief, heart-stopping moment. The sudden blackness sent a jolt of panic through me, and I reached out instinctively, grabbing Claire's hand. Dan? She whispered, her voice tight with fear. It's okay, I said, though my heart was hammering in my chest. The lights flickered back on, casting the room in a sickly yellow hue. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the air, like a storm about to break. I stood up, moving towards the door, when my phone buzzed again. Another message. Dread coiled in my stomach as I pulled it from my pocket and unlocked the screen. It was another photo. This time it showed the precinct from the outside, taken from across the street. The timestamp was only a minute old. Someone was watching us, right now. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The journal, the photos, the lights, it was all connected, part of some sick game. And now whoever was behind it was closing in. I turned back to Claire, her face a mask of terror. I had to do something, had to get us out of here before it was too late. But where could we go? If the journal was predicting everything, how could we escape it? As if in answer to my thoughts, the door to the room creaked open, revealing a shadowy figure standing in the hallway. My blood ran cold as the figure stepped into the light, revealing the last person I expected to see. It was O'Hara, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. His eyes were vacant, his expression blank, as if he was in a trance. And in his hand, glinting under the flickering light, was a knife, its blade slick with fresh blood. My mind screamed at me to move, to protect Claire, to do something, anything, but I was frozen, locked in place by the horror unfolding before me. O'Hara's lips parted, and he spoke in a voice that was not his own, a voice that echoed with malice and death. You can't escape what's already been written, detective. She's next. And then, with terrifying speed, he lunged. Everything seemed to slow down as O'Hara lunged, the knife glinting in his hand. I had only seconds to react, but my body felt sluggish, weighed down by the creeping terror that filled the room. Claire, get down! I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. She dove to the floor just as O'Hara's blade sliced through the air where her neck had been moments before. I didn't think there was no time to think. I grabbed the chair beside me and swung it with all my strength, the wood connecting with O'Hara's side in a sickening thud. He staggered, but he didn't fall. His eyes locked onto mine, empty and cold, as if the man I knew was no longer there. The sight sent a chill through me. This wasn't just O'Hara. This was something far worse. Get out of here, Claire, I yelled, my voice hoarse. Run! She scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with fear, and bolted for the door. O'Hara's head snapped towards her, and he took a step forward, but I was faster. I tackled him to the ground, the two of us crashing to the floor in a tangled mess of limbs and fury. The knife clattered away, skidding across the linoleum, but O'Hara didn't stop. He clawed at me with a strength that didn't seem natural, his nails digging into my skin, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. I fought back with everything I had, grappling with him, trying to get the upper hand. But he was relentless, his strength inhuman, and I could feel my energy draining fast. Just as I thought I couldn't hold him off any longer, Claire appeared at the doorway, holding the knife. Her hands were trembling, her face pale as a ghost, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Claire!" Don't I started, but she didn't hesitate. With a cry that was half fear, half fury, she drove the knife into O'Hara's back. He froze, his eyes widening in shock, and then a terrible gurgling sound escaped his lips. His grip on me slackened, and I shoved him off, rolling away as he collapsed to the floor. The room was eerily quiet for a moment, the only sound our ragged breathing. I stared at O'Hara's lifeless body, my mind reeling from the horror of what had just happened. Claire dropped the knife, her hands shaking uncontrollably. I rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace, her body trembling against mine. "It's okay," I whispered, though nothing about this was okay. "You're safe now." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. This was far from over. We needed to get out of the precinct now. I grabbed the journal from the table, the leather cold and sinister in my hands. Whatever malevolent force was tied to this thing, it was using the people around me, twisting them into something unrecognizable. As we stumbled out into the hallway, the lights flickered again, casting the corridor in a disorienting strobe of darkness and light. The walls seemed to close in around us, the air thick with a presence that watched our every move. We rounded the corner, heading for the back exit, but as we did, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the hallway, growing closer with each passing second. I looked back, my heart hammering in my chest. At the far end of the corridor stood a figure shrouded in shadow. It wasn't O'Hara. It was someone or something else. The figure began to move towards us, the footsteps unnervingly steady, as if it had all the time in the world. I could feel the malevolence radiating from it, the same cold, dark energy that had filled the journal. "Claire, run!" I shouted, pushing her ahead of me. We sprinted down the hallway, the figure's footsteps quickening behind us, a relentless predator closing in on its prey. We burst through the back exit, the cold night air hitting us like a slap to the face. I slammed the door shut behind us, but I knew it wouldn't hold for long. We had to keep moving. The alleyway was narrow, the darkness pressing in from all sides. We dashed through the maze of alleys, our footsteps echoing off the brick walls. I could hear the figure behind us, its footsteps growing louder, closer. The streetlights flickered as we ran, plunging us into brief moments of total darkness, where I could swear I felt something brushing against my skin, whispering in my ear. Finally, we emerged onto a deserted street, our breaths ragged, our bodies trembling from the adrenaline. I scanned the area, looking for anywhere we could hide. There, at the end of the block, was an old abandoned church. The windows were boarded up, the stone walls crumbling, but it was our only option. "This way!" I grabbed Claire's hand and we ran towards the church, the figure's footsteps echoing behind us, a constant reminder that we were being hunted. We reached the church and I yanked the heavy door open, the wood creaking in protest. We slipped inside and I slammed the door shut, sliding the rusted bolt into place. The darkness inside the church was absolute, swallowing us whole. For a moment, everything was silent. I could barely see Claire beside me, but I could feel her presence, hear her quick, shallow breaths. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder of the danger that still lurked outside. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of decaying pews and a crumbling altar. The air was thick with dust and decay, the smell of neglect permeating everything. "Dan, what do we do now?" Claire's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. I didn't have an answer. We couldn't run forever, and wherever we went, that thing would find us. But I had to protect her. I had to find a way to end this. "We stay here," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt, at least until morning. We'll figure out our next move then. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I felt it too, this overwhelming sense that no matter what we did, we were already doomed. As we moved deeper into the church, I felt the journal pulsing with a strange energy in my hand. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat as I felt compelled to open it. My hand moved on its own, flipping the journal open to a blank page, and then, right before my eyes, words began to form on the page, as if an invisible hand was writing them. My stomach twisted as I read the message, "You can't hide in the house of the dead. The final act is about to begin." A shiver ran down my spine as I realized the truth. This wasn't just about the journal predicting future murders. It was about finishing something that had already begun. The church was quiet, too quiet. The words in the journal echoed in my mind. The final act is about to begin. I wanted to scream, to tear the cursed book apart, but I knew it wouldn't help. Whatever force had written those words was real, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. We were trapped, like rats in a maze, with no way out but through the dark, twisted game that had been laid out for us. "Dan, what did it say?" Claire's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts, her eyes wide with fear. I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with the full weight of the truth, but she saw it in my expression. There was no hiding it now. It said, "We can't hide," I admitted, my voice hollow. "It knows we're here." Claire's face paled, and she took a step closer to me, seeking comfort in my presence. I pulled her into a hug, feeling the tremble of her body against mine. We were running out of time, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep her safe. "Maybe there's something in here," she whispered, glancing around the darkened church. "Something that can help us." It was a slim hope, but it was all we had. I nodded, and we began to search the church, moving cautiously through the crumbling pews and dusty aisles. My phone's flashlight flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of my vision. We reached the altar, where a massive stone cross loomed above us, cracked and weathered with age. Beneath it, a small door led to the basement, its hinges rusted and fragile. "Down there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There might be something we can use." Claire hesitated, her fear palpable, but she nodded. Together we pushed open the door, the wood groaning in protest, and descended into the darkness below. The basement was damp and cold, the walls lined with decaying stone. My flashlight flickered, threatening to die at any moment, and I cursed under my breath. We needed light more than what my phone could provide. I fumbled in my pocket for a matchbook I'd taken from a bar years ago, hoping the old matches hadn't gone bad. With shaking hands, I struck one, the flame flaring to life, casting a dim but welcome glow in the musty space. The light revealed a small room filled with dusty old boxes, a few broken chairs, and in the far corner something that sent a chill through me. An old wooden coffin, half hidden under a tattered black cloth. Dan Clare's voice was small, barely more than a breath. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The coffin was ancient, its wood splintered and worn, but it was the symbols carved into the lid that caught my attention. They were the same as the ones scrawled on the walls of the crime scenes I'd read about in the journal, the same symbols drawn in blood. Without thinking, I reached out and pulled back the cloth, revealing the full extent of the carvings. They were intricate, almost hypnotic, swirling patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. At the center of the coffin was a name carved deep into the wood. Daniel Grayson. My own name. I staggered back, my mind reeling. This was impossible. How could my name be on a coffin that looked centuries old? What kind of nightmare had we stepped into? "Dan, what is this?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we had to leave now. But as I turned to go, the basement door slammed shut, the force of it shaking the walls. The flame in my hand flickered, nearly going out, but I cupped it desperately, keeping it alive. "We're not alone," I whispered, dread twisting in my gut. A low rumbling sound filled the room, like the growl of something deep beneath the earth. The symbols on the coffin began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Claire grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "Dan, what's happening?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice hoarse, "but we need to get out of here." The coffin lid started to shake, the ancient wood splintering, as if something inside was trying to get out. The rumbling grew louder, the ground beneath us trembling. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. I yanked Claire towards the stairs, but just as we reached them, the coffin lid burst open with a deafening crack, splinters flying through the air. From within the coffin, a shadowy figure began to rise, its form indistinct but filled with an overwhelming sense of malevolence. It was as if the darkness itself had taken shape, a swirling mass of shadow and hate. The figure's eyes opened, two glowing orbs of fiery red, and fixed on me. A voice, cold and ancient, echoed in my mind, the words dripping with malice. "You cannot escape your fate, Daniel Grayson. It was written long before you were born." Claire screamed, the sound piercing through the darkness, but I couldn't move. The figure reached out, its shadowy hand stretching towards me, and I felt an icy grip around my heart. It was pulling me in, dragging me towards the coffin, towards whatever dark fate had been sealed in the journal. But just as the darkness seemed ready to consume me, something within the journal shifted. The pages began to glow with a faint golden light, the words on the pages rearranging themselves before my eyes. I could feel a surge of energy, a force fighting back against the malevolence that surrounded us. With the last of my strength, I wrenched the journal from my pocket and opened it, the light spilling out, filling the basement with its warmth. The shadow recoiled, its form wavering, as if the light was burning it from within. The voice in my mind roared in fury, the red eyes flaring with hatred. "This isn't over, Daniel Grayson. You will finish what was started. You will—" The voice was cut off as the shadow disintegrated, dissolving into the air like smoke in the wind. The coffin snapped shut with a final resounding thud, and the light from the journal faded. The basement was silent once more. The oppressive weight of the darkness lifted. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, the journal slipping from my hands to the floor. Claire rushed to my side, her face wet with tears. "Dan, are you okay?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. I nodded, though I felt anything but okay. The journal lay open beside me, its pages blank, the words that had once filled them now gone. "It's over," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. We climbed the stairs, the creaking wood underfoot reminding us of our fragile safety. As we reached the church's main hall, dawn was beginning to break outside, the first rays of light filtering through the broken windows. I looked down at the journal in my hands, now nothing more than a book with empty pages. Whatever had written those terrible predictions was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't finished, that the darkness had only been pushed back for now. We stepped out into the morning light, the sun warm on our faces, a stark contrast to the cold terror of the night. Claire leaned into me, exhausted but alive, and I held her close, grateful that we had survived. But as we walked away from the church, I couldn't help but glance back one last time. The shadows were long and deep in the morning light, and I knew somewhere out there the final chapter was still waiting to be written, and when it was, I would be ready.